Hi everyone. I have come up with a solution for what to call this drink that I have in my glass this morning. Because it just doesn't quite feel right to call it English tea if I'm not drinking it in a more traditional teacup. So I'm going to call it my English Revolver, and that's my drink. So moving on through the Beatles 150 series, we are still in the Revolver album, and as we have decided and begun doing, I have nothing in front of me. I don't have the title. I don't know who's playing anything about except I know it's the Beatles. I don't know anything about the song. All I know is that it is from the Revolver album. And of course, I have the little graph, the sound volume graph that shows on the screen here. That's it. So I will do a first listen that way, and then we'll pause. I'll read a bit, and then we'll go back through and have some fun pulling it apart. Okay, that one was really nice. I like it. I like the way it the sound is swirling and coming and going, and sometimes you can't. I especially like the way that some of the drone notes resonate with some of the vocal pitches. I think that is such a nice thing happening in there. So, all right, this is going to be fun. I'm trying to think. Should I play a guessing game? First of all, I don't know what to guess about the title. The best I can do would be maybe take the last line, I'll make love to you, as the title, but there wasn't really anything that jumped out at me as being identifiably the title. So...
Love You Too.
Love You Too. Okay. Love You Too. As far as the singer, this is another one that's kind of tricky. When it first started, I told myself, absolutely, it's not John Lennon. Towards the end, there were a couple places I thought, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm going to go with my first impression and say it's not John Lennon. I'm going to say it's probably Paul McCartney, but I might be wrong about that too. But I haven't heard enough of George Harrison to really get his sound in my ear, or Ringo as a solo voice. So I don't know what to say about that, except that I'm going to go with my first instinct and say it is not John. So that's the best I can do today about that. Well, let's see what I have to read.
That's George Harrison.
Oh, it is George Harrison. Okay, well...
And what's the instrument? Because you've heard it before.
Yes. Is that the sitar?
Yes.
So somebody has been doing a lot of practicing. So George Harrison is the sitar guy. Okay, well, that'll help me in the future if something like this comes up again with the sitar being a big feature. I might be able to guess a little more precisely. So this is number 60 in the 150 series, and the genre is classed as raga. Well, of course, because it's got enough sitar in it, you can really make it raga. On May 2nd, 1966, radio celebrity Brian Matthew interviewed the group for the 400th edition of the BBC radio show Saturday Club. Attention was drawn to the recording of their latest album Revolver, which had been underway for nearly a month at that time. Brian Matthew said, Can you disclose any secrets about this LP? Have you introduced any unusual musical instruments this time? John, no, Brian. You can't use a sitar again because everybody's using it. John, yes we can. Ringo, well, it's like saying you can't use a guitar because everyone's using it. George says, yeah, I play sitar on another track, but I don't care if everyone's using them, you know? I just play it because I like it. It does sound like he likes it. The track George Harrison mentioned was the unusually titled Love You Too, which not only included the sitar, but also infused the sound of traditional Indian classical music onto a Beatles album. Love You Too was one of the first tunes I wrote for sitar, George explains. Norwegian Wood was an accident as far as the sitar part was concerned. I wrote Love You Too on the sitar because the sitar sounded so nice and my interest was getting deeper all the time. I said it sounded like somebody was practicing. I wanted to write a tune that was specifically for the sitar. The composition adheres to the pitches of the Indian equivalent of Dorian mode and emulates the khyal vocal tradition of Hindustani classical music. Love You Too has been hailed by musicologists and critics as groundbreaking in its presentation of a non-Western musical form to rock audiences, particularly with regard to authenticity and avoidance of parody. That's one of the things that caught my ears about it. It has this feeling of, it's not just trying to copy, but it feels really fresh. Well, actually, a little interesting piece of information. Many years ago, early in my teaching career, an Indian classical band was touring the United States, performing their Indian classical music. And I don't know exactly how the connection came about, but they were traveling through Nashville, and the vocalist somehow found out that I was a harpist and harp teacher, and she somehow, there was some, several times removed connections, acquaintances that somehow put us in touch. I don't know exactly how it happened. I ended up teaching her. She bought a small harp, and I ended up teaching her some of the basics of harp music. But it was such a short period of time. They were just in the area for a little while. And I never got to hear them perform, and I've been sorry for it ever since, that I missed hearing them perform when they were here in Nashville. But, well, she had a lovely voice, and she was so excited to be exploring a new instrument. Now I'm imagining George, kind of the flip side, Western music, and now he's got his hands on a sitar, and he's all excited to be exploring a new instrument. So the piece does sound really good. Let's go back through and dig into it some more. When I was listening to this the first time, I was thinking, well, of course, it's tempting to want to try this on the harp because it has a lot of elements that we hear on the harp. Like, for example, whatever the notes are. Maybe down. That's more like it. That opening. But it doesn't sound the same, does it? It's the difference between wire strings and gut strings, and on a modern harp it just doesn't have the same effect. But the modern harp is the modern harp, and actually, historically, there have been not only gut strings but also wire strings, and it reminds me actually of the sound of Ethiopian harp music. And there are, on some of these traditional instruments, there are what we call brays, or they're a little piece of wood or bone or something that sits down here and can be turned to press against it to give more that buzzing zing zing sound. And so, as tempting as it is for me to try to play it on the harp, I also recognize it's not going to have the same effect. It ought to be, if one were going to add the harp in, you'd have to pick one of those older harp styles. It has a little bit of that buzz and twang, perhaps a different resonance because it's a different instrument, but it would fit the mix a lot better. But I love how improvisatory and open and free feeling this introduction is. I really like that about it. I also like the way that he sets us up kind of within this improvisation. He starts us thinking about intervals and space in the music. We have this nice glissando opening. Ding, ding. Okay, nice. A little bit of flair. And then this. Bum-ba-dee-dee-dim. That's a bit more open, a bit more spacious. And this. Bum dee, bum bum. Notice what he's doing. He's getting us to think about bum bum dee. And then a half step lower. Bum bum. And then whatever it is. And so he's kind of setting up our intervallic, scalic, tonal reference point for the entire piece in this improvisatory opening. Well, I am not going to judge this according to Indian classical standards because clearly that is not my realm of expertise. Although I have read a bit about it, studied a little bit about it in my whole studies through the years. What I understand is that authentic Indian classical music is very complex, very nuanced, and the whole design structure of it is more about the details and the nuances, subtle things like bending the notes, rhythms, small inflections within the music, and far less about harmonic progress. And that is one of the massive differences between Western art music or we could say Western classical music and Indian classical music. Because in Western classical music, this idea of harmonic progress is so embedded, and even in the past 150 years, as the conventions of harmony have been expanded and explored in really great new ways, there's still this ingrained sense of the harmony has a significant role to play in the musical shape, color, inflection, and overall impact. Whereas in Indian classical music, at least to my knowledge, that is not the case. And you see, as I relate to music, I am always very attentive to what's happening harmonically and melodically. So, all that is to say, I'm not going to judge this on how authentic it sounds, because I'm really quite certain that even though George Harrison managed to get a really Indian quality feeling, I'm sure that if an Indian classical musician who had gone through all the years and years of training and study which one has to do to really master the art form in its traditional style, would sit down and look at this, he'd probably shake his head and say, this isn't the real deal. But that doesn't matter to us, because nobody's trying to be the real deal here. What we're trying to do, what George Harrison did, is he gave us a fabulous feeling of exoticism located in a particular part of the world. And there's enough of the musical elements from that part of the world embedded in the piece that we do feel it and we do hear it. So that's about as far as I'm going to go into analyzing the Indian elements. However, from my background and my training, I think this introduction is really great because it's setting us up in this very free-form improvisatory way to hear a piece in a new manner or new style, something that is different to our ears. What it's doing is it's pointing out these specific intervals and pitches and letting us linger on them and appreciate the flavor that they bring to the music. And that is really important, especially if your audience is, let's say, not familiar with this style. You need a way to open the door and make it possible for them to hear it. You have to prepare the ears. And I feel like this introduction does a beautiful job of preparing our ears. This open, that's something we're going to hear a lot. And then these, notice how at first we have bum ding, and then bum ding spaced out. It's as if he's saying, look, these are the notes you're going to hear. This is how I'm going to be bending the notes. You'll hear some inflections and some elements in the music that are really important, and you'll hear them like this quite often. And then another kind of open drone sound, which is something else we'll run into quite often in this piece. And then he picks up the pace a bit and starts kind of fiddling around, wandering through these same intervals, these same scale patterns that he just identified for our ears. And then suddenly, here we go. Something like that. Only after we've been really brought into this mood, this space, and this musical sound. And then off we go. And at first, it's such a shock, it's such a jolt, that we don't really know what to make of it. It's almost like suddenly we're taken back to a different place. But then, we're just setting the beat. And then it starts to settle a little bit. And then the voice comes in. Each day just goes by so fast. Oh, wow. It's just a few notes. Let's hear that again. Oh, just goes so fast. 2 notes. Each day just goes so fast. But notice how he's singing. He's using the same sort of little bits of warping, bending, quarter tones, kind of. I'm sure he wasn't being really technically specific about it, but he clearly had the ear to pick out some of these distinctive elements of the traditional Indian style and start to import them into his own manner of singing and playing. So you hear these little bends and warps. And so you feel like there's a lot more than just these 2 notes. I mean, if I were to play it on the harp, only 2 notes. Each day just goes so fast. But listen to how he sings it. Each day just goes so fast. Each day just goes so fast. And it's as if there's suddenly a world of pitch and expressive opportunities that it's almost like we've taken a microscope and focused on a little drop of water, and suddenly it opens up and there's so much more than just a little tiny drop of water. Same with this. Even these 2 notes, it's like suddenly there's a whole world of musical opportunity within those 2 notes that we weren't really aware of, or at least focused on before. But now, because of what he's done at the beginning, we start to hear it already. And as a little help, we get to hear the sitar coming in with another little bit of its kind of motif to respond. Each day just goes so fast. I love that. That is probably, it's so fun there. And if any of you think that this has some semblance to Renaissance dance music, you're not far wrong, because we have a lot of the same kind of nasally, wiry sounding instruments from that era. We also have a lot of these drone notes, which we're hearing on the sitar. This drone, again, it will sound different on the harp, but if we have a low C, another C. There's so much color and brightness in there. And then you add this. Then you can place it here. Well, of course, again, the modern harp is too powerful, too resonant to really get the same effect. But you place that under something, and then you bring the voice in. And what I love about this is how this drone note is so stable, so solid. Bing, 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 bing. That as his voice kind of glides through all these micro pitches within the scale, we hear gradually it coming into line with the drone itself. But there's a sort of, again, an intense flavor of subtle, not even subtle, but microscopic differences between the notes. I turn around, it's past. That's just such a great place. It also kind of shows us a bit of his methodology compositionally, because we have this little, you might wonder, where did this come from? Me. But if you look at this, again, this little sitar motif, da-dum, da-da-da-dum-bum, you notice that it's kind of like this. This is just an extension of it. And so, once more, we back up to hear that sitar and its little motif, and then how the voice takes that and extends it, and extrapolates something out of it. It's past. You don't get time to hang a sign on. And the percussion, all the different textures that are now adding in, it brings to mind the colors of and the patterns that I associate with India. And again, that's me, an outsider. I don't know all the specific details and nuances. I wouldn't be able to judge, let's say, a piece of cloth with one pattern as opposed to another pattern. But I would recognize, it has sort of an Indian pattern to it. And I imagine myself going to a bazaar, and all the colors and scents and sounds swirling around, and it's so exciting and so intense, and the pungent aromas, and it brings to mind those image associations that I have with India. I've never been to India, but I still have enough awareness to know that certain things are linked to that culture and that part of the world. And so the music is able to bring me there and place me there in a way that, it's nice, it's fun. A lifetime is so short. And I love, sometimes if I'm playing the harp, I get a buzz and I'm like, I didn't want it to buzz. It's not built into musical style, design. But here, every time the sitar gets that little bit of zing to it, it's so exciting to hear it. It's like it just makes your eyes pop open again. And okay, I want to talk a bit more about the fact that I really appreciate what's going on with the percussion, because it's giving a real dance-like quality. And I love that. It doesn't sound like we're just sitting and meditating, although, there are all those great traditions too. But it feels like there's activity, there's a dance quality to this. It makes you want to just explore and be excited about the whole experience. And I love that. Just the combination of the two. Da 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 dum bum, da 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 dum bum, and then da 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 dum, and then of course the sitar with its little flourishes and motif, but then the drone the drone is such an important part of this. And well, I'm noticing in my score, it actually identifies a couple chords. It's calling it C, it's calling it B flat. This is a case where I'm actually going to disagree with the score a little bit. There is a sort of implied B flat, but the C, there's a problem with that. Because if you look closely, and it's kind of hard to see in here because the notes are in a handwritten style, but if we zoom in, you can see that there is a marking right here above each E. Basically, it's supposed to be an E flat. And going back to what was said at the beginning, if we're going to use Western terminology, we would say this was in the Dorian mode, which has the flat third and the flat seventh. And so, yeah, I think there was an error. It should at least be saying C minor if they're going to dare to write chords on something like this. But it's, again, my main disagreement is that it's really not about anything harmonic. You have the drone, and then you have all these wonderful lines of exploration through the scale, through the microtones of the scale, and the resonances. It's about resonance. I'm going to say it's not even so much about texture, although the texture is exotic and it's fun and it's beautiful. But it's about the resonance and the relationship between the different pitches and how they resonate one with the other, which is different than harmonic design and structure. I like the way, and I don't know if it's George twice, if he's singing two different parts, or if it's one of the other guys also singing along, but there are a few places where you hear another voice holding a pitch, like here. And so then it becomes about the resonance between the voices as well. And I can imagine them just sitting in the studio saying, all right, the song's over, but they were having so much fun. They just kept it going forever and ever. And whoever was making this, designing it for the album itself, they said, oh, we've got to fade it out somewhere because this is going on too long. And probably they all cracked up laughing at some point. It feels like George is kind of stepping into his own. I really haven't noticed him doing so much writing and creating up until now. And suddenly, I don't know, this sitar really seems to have lit a fire under him. And suddenly stuff is coming out, which is great and fun. Well, okay. Lyrically, I won't say a lot, although the only comment I have is it doesn't really sound like Indian lyrics. I'm no expert in Indian poetry either, but my understanding and impression is that it's a lot more, a lot more than just bemoaning the passing of time and talking about making love all day long and I'll make love to you if you want me to, before I'm a dead old man. So it's still in a way, and it's so funny, isn't it? Because this music on Revolver, as so many of you have been telling me for so long, is such a different creature than the early Beatles music. But it's so funny to me to hear something like this, which has such a fantastical, exotic feel to it. He's been able to catch enough of the special features of Indian music that make it stand out and distinguish itself from classical music. That even if he's not a thoroughly trained master of Indian music, he can create something which we all suddenly associate with that part of the world, that culture, that musical tradition. And at the same time, it kind of goes backwards and falls into the old, little bit banal, love song stuff. Although, I don't know, She Loves Me, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah is even more exciting than this, isn't it? It's kind of cute, isn't it? To have this contrast. Clearly, he's focused on exploring the instrument and exploring music, and he's so excited about the creative opportunities and musical potential. He just didn't really have time to think about lyrics. He just had to throw something in there. Whatever came to mind. Good to go. What a fun song. I like it. As I said, I'm not going to judge it according to its Indian quality. But from the Western perspective, it's great. It opens our ears, and I'm trying to place myself back in that era when world music, I understand, was a fairly new phenomenon, actually kind of a fad as far as I know, but still kind of new. And so getting the ordinary listener, your worldwide audience, to be able to enjoy such a foreign sound, a foreign instrument as the sitar. Okay, to have a few little notes throwing in some spice, that's one thing. To build a whole piece around the instrument, having just picked it up not too long ago yourself, it's quite daring, I think. And from that perspective, I think this piece is really, really impressive. So, a lot of fun. That's the Beatles. Oh, the title. What was it? Love You Too? Love You Too, but T-O, not Love You Too, as in I love you also, too, but Love You to what? To the end? Well, I guess that is perhaps the most interesting part of the whole lyrical thing, because a lifetime is so short, a new one can't be bought. To me, it feels like it's saying, "I'll love you to as long as I'm alive. I'll love you to the end." So, not so bad, is it? So that was the Beatles' "Love You To" by George Harrison. Loads of fun, and let's see what comes next. I'll see you soon.